Nightside with Dan Ray on WBZ, Boston's News Radio.
Well, I am sure that none of you in this listening audience have ever had a horrible boss or a miserable manager. And because of that, we're going to speak with Joel Patterson, who's a workplace expert, and he's going to explain what a horrible boss or a miserable manager is. Again, I'm sure no one here has ever experienced a bad boss, but we should be aware that there are a few out there. Joel, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well, Dan. How about yourself?
Good. I'm being a little sarcastic there because I expect most people at some point have believed they had a bad boss. In this day and age, are bosses getting better or getting worse, in your opinion?
I do think they're getting better. I think it would be a little sad to say that they weren't. And I think there's just more awareness about what a bad boss is. But that said, there's plenty of bad bosses out there. I mean, we've all had them. If you look at the statistics around why people actually leave their job, most of the time it has nothing to do with their actual job. It's because of their boss. They didn't have a good relationship with them. There's a litany of items that creates a bad boss, whether they don't provide feedback or they disorganize, they don't delegate, they show favoritism. I mean, there's a million of these things, and it's different for everybody in how they respond to them. But I think the important thing here is to recognize that, if you have a bad boss, do something about it. You know, there's still a pretty tight labor market.
What can you do? You're sitting there, you're an employee, you're new to the group, you're a junior person, and you're saddled with a bad boss, and you realize it about 2 months into the experience. I guess you could leave, but I don't know that is helpful. What can people do? How can they deal with that? It's a tough spot to be in.
It's absolutely a tough spot, and there's no simple answer. I think there's a few steps that you can take if you are, step back and look at how you want to manage this. The most important thing is just communicating. It seems very simple, but it's not easy, right? I mean, you've got to be willing to create a space, create a meeting, and say, hey, this is how I'm really feeling. Help me, coach me through this. I think you're gonna have to be vulnerable in order to have any kind of progress at all. But again, you go back to, well, if you're dealing with a boss that isn't very open to that kind of feedback anyway, it's going to be very challenging. And so you're going to have to look at the situation and try to find a way that makes sense for that specific scenario. But ultimately, you're going to have to say something.
Okay, if you have a bad boss, and I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to the audience. If anyone in the audience has a bad boss, the weaknesses of that boss, the bad habits of that boss, whatever those habits are, I'm sure apply across the board. It's not just problems. Every other employee who is under the direction of that boss, I assume, probably feels the same way, right?
You would think so, okay. Right? But there are situations where, maybe it's discriminatory. But yeah, in general, I like to assume positive intent, yes.
Okay, so why is it then that the bosses above the bad boss aren't themselves smart enough to look at the situation and say, gee, why have so many people left who were under this fellow's or this person's guidance? Do bad bosses just continue to go along, and they're very rarely called to account by the upper level management? Is that part of the problem?
It's an interesting point you hit on, because we've all experienced that as well. In my business, we work with companies to try to help them scale. And so we're working with the executive level most of the times. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to somebody and I think, how did this person get in this position? Because I can tell that they're not a very nice person and I wouldn't want to work for them. But what I think those people have done is they've managed to, they manage up. They don't manage down. They're able to convince the people above them that they're doing a really good job. And if they're not doing a good job, it's probably somebody else's fault, is what they're saying. Yeah. But when it comes to how they actually manage people that they need to coach, they're clueless. And that's where at some point it will catch up to them as people, aren't performing. I mean, you have to hold them accountable at that level, but people slip through. It's just reality. And it's a little disappointing at times because you don't want those people to succeed, but sometimes they do.
Well, it's sort of like the Peter principle in some respects. Obviously, I just think there's irreparable harm done to the company that you're working for when that company has bad bosses, particularly if the people at the top of the food chain don't realize that and root them out and say, hey, look, we expect you to treat our employees as human beings. They're not chattel. They're not there to be yelled at or to be abused. You want them to be productive, and it's the best incentive that any boss can give an employee to work harder is not a pay raise. It's simply an acknowledgement, a pat on the back. Hey, that was a great meeting you held, or that was a great interview you conducted. You're coming in early, or you're staying a little late, and we really appreciate it. There's a lot of bosses that have no clue, and I've seen it, but they have no clue in how far a good word or a word of encouragement goes. It's almost in the context of sports. Baseball players, if they hit 300 and they get on base 3 times out of 10, they're in the Hall of Fame. And they go up and they strike out. The manager can look at him and say, what you do? You missed 3 pitches. Why not say, hey, he caught you in a curveball. Remember that next time. You'll get him. I put it in sort of the sports metaphor that I think everybody can understand. When quarterbacks fail and they throw incomplete passes, they're not trying to throw incomplete passes. Or when they get intercepted. But the coach, a good coach, doesn't scream and yell and say, why did you do that? Like they did it on purpose. They're going to encourage him and say, hey, look, next time, watch that linebacker sits out there and he just waits to pounce, whatever. And they can do that in the context of just regular businesses. Do you guys teach that at all? Your
analogy is exactly the same one I use.
Good.
Good managers, they coach more than they manage, right? I mean, we've kind of moved past. We used to be in this decade of compliance, where any kind of HR things had to be, here's your checklist. You got to do this, this, and this. But that's not a good long-term approach. You've got to be able to really relate to people and coach them through whatever situation that they're in to allow them to be the best versions of themselves.
Exactly.
And people that go into those management or boss situations that just want to micromanage and just basically tell them what to do all day, they don't go anywhere. Not these days. You've got to be able to get more out of people, and that involves them growing as well. So however you can invest in them to allow them to become bigger and better than they are now, you're going to be a lot more successful as a team. But it's easy to talk about it, but it's not a simple thing to necessarily push through.
Couldn't agree with you more. Joel, how can folks who are listening get in contact with you? And if there are businesses out there, and there may be some smart business people who say, hey, we may have this problem within our office ethic, how can they get in touch with you and get some help?
Sure. We are at thevested.com, and we like to work with anybody that's looking to grow and scale their company. And that means a lot of different things to a lot of people, but it really is about having the right systems, the process, the technology in place that can get you there, including don't be a bad boss. Don't be a jerk. You're going to be okay in the long term.
That's a good rule of thumb, isn't it? So
that's right.
It's simply thebest.com is the website.
The Vested. Like the vested.
The Vested.
VESTED, yes.
Okay, well, like vested, like your stock is vested. VESTED.
You got it.
Thevested.com. Okay, that sounds great.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Joel Patterson, ladies and gentlemen. And he sounds like the sort of guy that you might be able to utilize. We're coming back on Nightside right after the 9 o'clock news. Thank you, Joel. We'll talk again.